John, how did you pick up this information, for example, on the Mayans in 2012?
Well, George, real briefly, remember I had this encounter that shook me to my core when I saw my deceased physicist buddy, George Vigay, right?
Yep.
And as I started looking for information on near-death experience, I ran into the work, of course, of Ray Moody and Ken Ring at the University of Connecticut, and they were convinced that shamanism was exactly what the set of symptoms, you might say, of the near-death experience were initially. And they came to the conclusion years after their initial assessment that there's the what they call it, the shamanizing of humanity is going on. That's how they put it. Mm-hmm. And I started looking at that in this way, that my experience was an initiation into the other side. And so I started looking at it as a spiritual journey, and that led me into the work of Joseph Campbell on the power of mythology. So the short of it is that I realized I had to get smart about these other cultures. That led me into Egyptian and Mayan cosmology and the work of John Major Jenkins and all this stuff. And I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together for myself slowly over a number of years. And this pattern that emerged was they were all talking about the end of the Mayan calendar. And, of course, I came to the work of, like, Terence McKenna. Mm-hmm. And, Terence made an impact on me because, like myself, we were coming at this 2012 idea from totally different perspectives.
And McKenna really didn't get the credit that he was due.
Yes, correct. That's right. Or Jose Arguelles did, perhaps, and some others in the early years. But, yeah, Terence was just so brilliant, and he brought this time wave zero idea and this thing where there's peaks and valleys of major historical events, a timeline, and that this where we're headed in 2012 is this extremely chaotic yet creative potential, and I really resonated with that. I knew that we were kind of walking on thin ice at every level, economic and what we were doing to the climate, et cetera. But at the same time, I realized there had to be this larger celestial or cosmic picture going on, and that's where the Mayans came in. The Mayans' ideas have kind of been hijacked. I agree with John Major Jenkins that the real focus was on transformation of consciousness, but at the same time, the Egyptian axiom is as above, so below, as within, so without. So I realized that we're not going to get this quantum shift in consciousness without the Earth herself going through kind of a labor pain period of cataclysms that we're seeing right now, in fact.
All right, let's talk about, first of all, the worst-case scenario for 2012. Get it out of the way, and then let's talk about some positive things tonight.
Great.
And we'll take phone calls with you next hour as well, John. We might do a special 2-hour series of calls with you. People just love this topic. And we've got to talk about near-death experiences also.
Yes.
Now, in the worst-case scenario, let's get your take on it because, first of all, we're getting bombarded with, and I said years ago we're not going to have a bird flu pandemic, yet that's still out there. Now people are talking about a pole shift, a new ice age, solar flares that could wipe us out with an X flare. All this tied into 2012?
Well, I think so, and of course that's what I wrote a book on, and to examine the possibilities and leave it to the reader to determine, where we're at in that cycle of cataclysm. But I believe that there's still a worst-case scenario, unfortunately, out there that's viable. The reason I say this is, again, the native elders and the traditionalists, those keepers of the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, for their own clan or tribe or nation, they haven't signed off yet on this new age idea that we're all going to become bliss bunnies and float into the Netherland in 2012. It's going to be a real horse race to the end, it looks like, and what it is about is getting enough people at the level of consciousness where they at least know that they have an impact on their immediate environment, on their health, on their family, on their employment, etc. It looks to me that, we're seeing this great collection of information, the kind of stuff that Greg Braden, for example, is putting out, Bruce Lipton, for example. So we got that side of the coin. We got folks that are not really focused on any of the earth changes. They're looking at how to heal us, how to get us up to speed optimally in terms of our immune system. Same kind of stuff I'm getting, I'm involved in too as well. But now we got the cataclysmic folks, the catastrophists on one side, on the other side, who are saying, why bother? Just, pack your bags, you're going to leave the planet. You got the UFO community, some wondering whether there will be an intervention from an extraterrestrial, group of folks. I'm open. I realize this is a huge cosmos with probably infinite possibilities, but what is it that we want as human beings, I think, is the key, George.
We were lucky about a year and a half ago, John, when an X-flare popped off the sun, but was not directly in our line. Had it been, we would have had one heck of a problem here.
Yeah, that's right. We would have certainly knocked out that segment of space satellites. We probably would have fried some grids in some major regions of this planet. And again, that's the roll of the dice too, isn't it? I mean, if we're talking about solar flares that hit third world countries in terms of their power system, unfortunately, this is sad too that we don't have them up to the industrial level that we are at yet in terms of hygiene and everything. And I'm sensitive to that too, the children, like you are with the Children's International Fund, and I'm a member of that as well. And, I think that what we're seeing here is a kind of a wake-up call to the developed country. I mean, we're sitting here talking to a lot of folks tonight. If we collectively decide that we want to do X instead of Y, we could do it. And that's important. I think that in the native traditional summary of what that's about, what the prophecies are about, it's saying that we have the ability to change our minds on a dime, so to speak. And if we decide to pull together instead of push each other apart, that we can change this world for the better.
The pole shift, do you see it as an axis shift? I mean, is the planet going to literally flip, or are we talking about a magnetic pole shift?
I see an energetic shift, but remember, some of the new research in gravity, for example, electrogravitics, the stuff like Colonel Tom Bearden and others in the early years, but, what's going on here is that a huge influx of energy is impacting our entire solar system, just not the Earth. And so what we're seeing is this potential for a huge electrodynamic discharge going on, and the piezoelectric effect is what I'm talking about when you crush rocks underground. So these earthquakes, in my opinion, are shifting a gravitational moment at the core of the Earth. At the same time, they're reverberating through the entire core. And NASA, in fact, and USGS came out last week with a kind of a paper addressing that topic for the first time that I have seen it, at least, saying that when China had a magnitude 8 approximately, that just went right through the entire core of the Earth to the other side of the planet. Now, you can imagine if we get a few of these 8.0s ringing, the core, we're going to see the ring of fire light up in terms of volcanic activity. So I see this coming as a natural cycle of events changing the Earth dynamics, but I don't think that the catastrophic, doom and gloom stuff is correct, but I see that we need to prepare for these major events.
Do you see a major loss of life, as some people out there predict?
Well, when we consider that, the vast portion of the American population is on the coastlines, West Coast, Gulf of Mexico, and East Coast, you can imagine that it doesn't take too many tsunamis to wipe the slate clean, so to speak. And, that has been my concern for at least 15 years, that what we're going to see is a, Gulf of Mexico tsunami, an East Coast tsunami, West Coast tsunami. And, of course, those can be kind of isolated, too. I'm not sure I see a huge, 300-foot wall of water washing coast to coast. I don't see that in my visions, but I have had visions of this that I write about, of course, and one was Mount Rainier detonating. But it didn't tell me that was triggered by anything, but I realized that the Cascadia subduction zone was 80 miles off the Washington-Oregon coast, and that entire Juan de Fuca plate, had a potential to generate, up to a 9-point magnitude quake. So again, as you start looking at the real science to this, you see that the potential is there. Yellowstone, yes. Could it erupt? Yes. Could you have for example, a East Coast tidal wave that was triggered by a mountain in West Africa in the Canary Islands, as some other mystics